What if I told you that Zambia's President Hakainde Hichilema stood before the nation but didn't reveal the full truth? That behind his so-called emergency address lies a deeper, darker story. One that involves the late Edgar Lungu, Mama Esther Lungu, and a body viewing that has shaken not just Zambia but the entire world. Tonight, we expose what HH didn't say, why Lungu's body remains at the center of mystery, and how this silence could change the course of Zambia's history forever. Zambia is on edge. President Hakainde Hichilema's recent emergency address has raised more questions than answers. What exactly did HH leave out? Why is Edgar Lungu's body viewing turning into one of the most controversial events in Zambia's history? In this documentary-style analysis, we break down the dark truth behind HH's silence, Esther Lungu's role, the government's hidden pressures, and what this means for Zambia's political future. From Lusaka to Pretoria, from ordinary citizens to global leaders, the unanswered questions surrounding Edgar Lungu's final journey continue to spark debate. Watch till the end to understand what HH didn't say and why it matters for Zambia, Africa, and the world. What HH didn't say. A nation mourns, but whispers of secrets echo louder than grief. When Zambia's President Hakainde Hichilema addressed the nation in the wake of Edgar Lungu's death, his words were measured, solemn, and steeped in calls for unity. Yet, beneath the surface, a storm of questions swirled. Questions he didn't answer, truths he didn't reveal. What was the real reason behind the bitter feud over Lungu's body? Why did his family fight so fiercely to keep his remains in South Africa? And what shadowy forces were at play in Pretoria, pulling strings in a drama that gripped a nation and shocked the world? On June 5, 2025, Zambia awoke to the news that Edgar Lungu, the nation's sixth president, had passed away at the age of 68 in a Pretoria hospital. His death, following an undisclosed illness, should have been a moment for national unity, a time to honor a leader who had shaped Zambia's trajectory from 2015 to 2021. Instead, it ignited a firestorm of controversy that exposed deep-seated political rivalries, institutional tensions, and a struggle over legacy that continues to haunt Zambia's political landscape. President Hakainde Hichilema's emergency address, delivered in the days following Lungu's death, was meant to calm a grieving nation. He spoke of solemnity, unity, and an outpouring of love and compassion, invoking the national motto, "One Zambia, One Nation." But what he didn't say spoke louder than his words. The address glossed over the bitter dispute between Lungu's family and the Zambian government, a conflict that erupted over the repatriation of his body and the nature of his funeral. It avoided mentioning Lungu's explicit dying wish that Hichilema, his longtime political rival, should not attend his funeral or come near his remains. It sidestepped the allegations of political vendettas, the accusations that Hichilema's government was exploiting Lungu's death for political gain, and the murky role of Pretoria's courts in halting a private burial. Most strikingly, it ignored the growing whispers of government secrets, international intrigue, and a deeper, darker truth about why Lungu's body became a battleground. This narrative delves into the untold story of Hichilema's address, what he omitted, why it mattered, and how it reflected the fractured state of Zambian politics. It uncovers the mystery of Lungu's body viewing, the silence of his widow Esther Lungu, the Pretoria connection, and the global reactions that shaped the discourse. It also probes the implications for Zambia's political future, asking whether this saga marks a turning point or a continuation of the country's polarized trajectory. Prepare to journey into a tale of power, betrayal, and secrets, where the fight over a dead president's body reveals the living pulse of a nation in turmoil. HH's emergency address explained. In a nation teetering on the edge of division, a president's words can either heal or inflame. When Hakainde Hichilema took to the airwaves to address Edgar Lungu's death, he promised unity, but left a trail of unanswered questions that fueled suspicion and deepened mistrust. What was the true purpose of his emergency address, and why did it feel like a carefully scripted performance hiding a darker agenda? Hakainde Hichilema, Zambia's president since defeating Lungu in a landslide victory in 2021, faced a delicate moment when news of Lungu's death broke. The two men were not just political opponents. Their rivalry was personal, rooted in years of animosity. In 2017, when Lungu was president, Hichilema was imprisoned for 4 months on treason charges after his motorcade allegedly failed to yield to Lungu's. The charges, widely seen as politically motivated, were dropped only after international pressure from the Commonwealth. This history cast a long shadow over Hichilema's response to Lungu's passing. On June 5, 2025, Lungu's daughter, Esther Lungu, announced her father's death in a heartfelt video on social media, confirming he had passed away at 6 o'clock in Pretoria's Mediclinic Medforum due to cardiac complications from surgery. The announcement caught many by surprise, as Lungu had been under medical supervision for an undisclosed illness, with rumors about his health swirling for months. Hichilema's response came hours later, a text post on Facebook that expressed condolences but notably lacked the immediacy or warmth one might expect for a former head of state. The delay and the medium, a cold, written statement rather than a televised address, raised eyebrows, especially as the national broadcaster, ZNBC, remained silent on the news initially. The emergency address, delivered days later, was Hichilema's attempt to seize control of a narrative spiraling out of his grasp. The nation was already divided, with Lungu's Patriotic Front (PF) party and his family accusing the government of politicizing his death. Hichilema's speech was carefully worded, worded, emphasizing national unity and the need to honor Lungu's legacy. He declared a 16-day national mourning period, later extended to 23 days, with flags at half-mast and solemn music on radio stations. He promised a state funeral with full military honors to be held at the Mulungushi Conference Center in Lusaka, and assured the public that the government was engaging with Lungu's family to ensure a dignified burial. Public reaction. The response to Hichilema's address was polarized. Supporters of the UPND praised his call for unity and his commitment to a state funeral, seeing it as a necessary assertion of national protocol. Social media posts from governing party supporters celebrated the prospect of Lungu's body coming home, likening it to a national victory. However, PF members and Lungu supporters viewed the address as hypocritical, accusing Hichilema of exploiting the tragedy for political gain. Given Lubinda, the PF's acting president, called the government's actions a political game that dishonored Lungu's memory. Civil society groups, including the Council of Churches in Zambia, urged dialogue to resolve the standoff, warning that it was hurting the dignity of our country. The address, while polished, failed to quell the growing unrest. It left Zambians grappling with questions about what Hichilema was not saying and why. Was he avoiding the truth about his government's intentions? Was he concealing a deeper agenda tied to the 2026 elections? Or was he simply trying to navigate an impossible situation without alienating a divided populace? The answers lay in the unfolding drama over Lungu's body, a saga that would reveal the fault lines of Zambian politics and the secrets Hichilema chose to keep. The mystery of Lungu's body viewing. A former president lies in a Pretoria morgue, his body guarded by private security, caught in a tug-of-war that defies explanation. Why has Edgar Lungu's corpse become a symbol of division, and what secrets surround the viewing of his remains? The mystery deepens as whispers of conspiracy and betrayal swirl, pointing to a truth far darker than anyone imagined. The dispute over Lungu's body. Edgar Lungu's death on June 5, 2025 was meant to mark the end of a chapter in Zambian history. Instead, it opened a Pandora's box of conflict, with his body at the center of a bitter struggle between his family, the Zambian government, and the PF. The core issue was where and how Lungu should be buried. The government insisted on repatriating his remains to Zambia for a state funeral at Embassy Memorial Park, citing tradition and national interest. Lungu's family, led by his widow Esther and daughter Tassila, demanded a private burial in South Africa, honoring what they claimed was Lungu's dying wish that Hichilema not be involved in his funeral. The dispute escalated when the Zambian government filed an urgent case in the Pretoria High Court on June 25, 2025, to halt a private burial scheduled in Johannesburg. The court's intervention, just hours before the ceremony, prevented the family from proceeding, leaving mourners at the Cathedral of Christ the King in a state of confusion and grief. The ruling, upheld on August 8, 2025, ordered Lungu's family to surrender his body for repatriation to Zambia. Yet, the family's appeal kept the body in South Africa under private security to prevent unauthorized removal. This standoff turned Lungu's remains into a political lightning rod, raising questions about why his body viewing became so contentious. Cultural and political implications. The dispute over the body viewing was not just logistical, it was deeply cultural and political. Zambian historian Sishiwa Sishiwa criticized the government's approach as culturally insensitive, arguing that excluding the family from decisions undermined claims of a dignified burial. In Zambian tradition, the family holds significant authority over funeral rites, particularly for a figure of Lungu's stature. The government's insistence on a state funeral, citing the precedent of Kenneth Konda's burial in 2021, clashed with this cultural norm, as Konda's family had also objected to a state-controlled burial but were overruled. Politically, the body viewing became a battleground for competing narratives. For Hichilema, a public viewing in Lusaka would reinforce his government's authority and project unity ahead of the elections. For the PF and Lungu's family, a private viewing in South Africa was a way to preserve Lungu's legacy as a leader independent of Hichilema's influence. The standoff highlighted Zambia's regional and political polarization, with Lungu's eastern province base rallying behind the family while UPND strongholds supported the government's position. Esther Lungu's silence and exile pressure. In the eye of a political storm, one woman stands silent, her grief a quiet rebellion against a nation's demands. Esther Lungu, widow of Zambia's former president, has become an enigma, her voice absent as her family fights to honor her husband's wishes. But is her silence a choice, or is she under pressure to flee into exile, caught in a web of accusations and political vendettas? Esther Lungu's role. Esther Lungu, married to Edgar Lungu since 1986, was a constant presence during his presidency, known as a practicing Baptist and a supportive figure in his political career. As Zambia's First Lady from 2015 to 2021, she maintained a low profile, focusing on charitable work and family life. However, after Lungu's defeat in 2021, she and her children, including daughter Tassila, faced corruption charges that they denounced as politically motivated. These charges, which included allegations of vehicle theft against Esther, intensified the family's distrust of Hichilema's government. Following Lungu's death, Esther emerged as a central figure in the funeral dispute, attending a private memorial service in Pretoria and supporting the family's decision to bury Lungu in South Africa. Yet, her public silence was striking. Unlike her daughter Tassila, who announced Lungu's death on social media, or spokesperson Makibi Zulu, who fiercely defended the family's stance, Esther made no public statements. Her silence was interpreted by some as a dignified response to grief, by others as a strategic retreat in the face of mounting pressure. Cultural and political dynamics. In Zambian culture, widows often play a central role in funeral arrangements, but Esther's silence contrasted with this expectation. Her daughter Tassila and spokesperson Makibi Zulu took the lead in public statements, possibly to shield Esther from the political fray. This dynamic reflected the family's strategy to balance cultural respect with political resistance, ensuring that Esther's grief was not exploited by the government or media. However, it also left her vulnerable to speculation, with some questioning whether her silence signaled weakness or defiance. The pressure on Esther was not just personal but political. As the widow of a former president, she was a symbol of Lungu's legacy, and her actions, or lack thereof, carried weight. By remaining silent, she avoided fueling Hichilema's narrative of national unity, which some saw as a subtle act of resistance. Yet, this silence also left the family's narrative incomplete, allowing the government to dominate the public discourse. Implications. Esther Lungu's silence is a microcosm of the broader tensions in the Lungu saga. It reflects the personal toll of a political feud, the weight of cultural expectations, and the specter of persecution in a polarized nation. Whether her silence was a choice or a necessity, it underscored the challenges faced by a family caught between grief and power. As the dispute over Lungu's body continued, Esther's role, silent but central, remained a poignant reminder of the human cost of political battles. Government secrets and Pretoria connection. Hook. Behind closed doors in Pretoria, a legal battle unfolds that could reshape Zambia's future. Why is the Zambian government so desperate to bring Edgar Lungu's body home, and what secrets lie in the shadows of South Africa's courts? The Pretoria connection hints at a web of diplomacy, power plays, and hidden agendas that threaten to unravel a nation's fragile unity. The Zambian government's agenda. The Zambian government's insistence on repatriating Lungu's body was framed as a matter of national interest, rooted in tradition and sovereignty. Since Zambia's independence in 1964, all former presidents have been buried at Embassy Memorial Park in Lusaka, a site reserved for heads of state. The government argued that Lungu, as a former president, belongs to the nation and must be honored with a state funeral. Attorney General Mulalo Kabesha cited the precedent of Kenneth Konda's burial, where national interest trumped family wishes, to justify the legal action in Pretoria. However, the government's aggressive pursuit raised suspicions. Why was it willing to risk international embarrassment and domestic division to control Lungu's funeral? Some analysts, like Sishiwa, argued that political considerations, not public interest, were driving the agenda. With the 2026 elections looming, Hichilema's UPND stood to gain from a state funeral that projected unity and authority, potentially neutralizing the PF's influence. The government's decision to cut short the national mourning period on June 20, 2025, after the family halted repatriation, suggested a strategic move to shift focus away from the dispute. The Pretoria court rulings. The Pretoria High Court became the epicenter of the controversy, issuing two pivotal rulings. On June 25, 2025, Deputy Judge President Aubrey Fago Ledwaba halted Lungu's private burial in Johannesburg, granting the Zambian government's urgent request to postpone the ceremony pending a final decision. The court set a hearing for August 4, 2025, giving the government until July 4 to submit arguments for repatriation and the family until July 11 to respond. On August 8, Judge Aubrey Ledwaba ruled that the Zambian government was entitled to repatriate the body and order the family to surrender it immediately. The family's appeal delayed implementation, keeping Lungu's body in Pretoria under private security. These rulings raised questions about South Africa's role. Why did a South African court intervene in a Zambian matter? The answer lies in the delicate balance of interstate relations. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, who expressed condolences and described Lungu as a brother and friend, was in a difficult position. Allowing a foreign head of state to be buried in South Africa without his government's consent could set a precedent with far-reaching implications for African diplomacy. South Africa's Foreign Minister, Ronald Lamola, met with Hichilema on June 22 to ease tensions, emphasizing the need to respect the family's wishes while acknowledging Zambia's sovereignty. Unresolved secrets. The government's secrecy about its motives and the Pretoria connection remains a point of contention. Why was the government so adamant about controlling Lungu's body, even at the risk of alienating his supporters? What role did South African authorities play behind the scenes, and were there undisclosed agreements between Hichilema and Ramaphosa? The answers, if they exist, lie in the opaque negotiations and legal maneuvers that define the Pretoria connection, a chapter in the saga that continues to fuel suspicion and intrigue. Zambia's political future after Lungu. A president is gone, but his shadow looms large. Edgar Lungu's death has left Zambia at a crossroads, with a fractured opposition, an emboldened ruling party, and a nation grappling with its identity. As the 2026 elections approach, what does the battle over Lungu's body reveal about Zambia's political future, and can the country heal its wounds before it's too late? Lungu's legacy and the opposition's crisis. Edgar Lungu's presidency from 2015 to 2021 was a polarizing era. Supporters credited him with infrastructure development, including roads and the National Health Insurance Scheme, while critics blamed him for economic mismanagement, rising debt, and Zambia's default on its debt in 2020. His defeat in 2021 by Hichilema by nearly 1 million votes reflected widespread dissatisfaction with the PF's governance. Yet, Lungu remained a charismatic figure, returning to frontline politics in 2023 and leading the PF as its candidate for the 2026 elections until a constitutional court ruling disqualified him for having served 2 terms. His death left the PF leaderless and fragmented. The party, already weakened by factionalism since 2021, faced an acute leadership crisis. Lungu's appeal as a unifying figure was central to the PF strategy, and his absence threatened its viability in the 2026 elections. The dispute over his funeral further deepened divisions, with some PF members traveling to South Africa to support the family, while others held press conferences to assert control over Lungu's legacy. The lack of a clear successor risks pushing Zambia towards single-party dominance under the UPND, a scenario analysts warn could undermine democratic checks and balances. Hichilema's opportunity and challenge. For Hichilema, Lungu's death and the funeral dispute present both an opportunity and a challenge. The UPND's dominance is strengthened by the PF's disarray, giving Hichilema a clear edge in 2026. The government's push for a state funeral was seen as a strategic move to project unity and authority, reinforcing Hichilema's image as a statesman. However, the heavy-handed approach, legal action in Pretoria cutting short the mourning period, has alienated Lungu's supporters, particularly in the eastern province where regional loyalties run deep. The dispute has also highlighted Hichilema's vulnerabilities. Accusations of using oppressive tactics similar to those he criticized during Lungu's presidency have resurfaced. The corruption charges against Lungu's family, the restrictions on his movements in 2023, and the legal battle over his body have fueled perceptions of vindictiveness. If Hichilema fails to bridge these divides, the 2026 elections could see heightened regional and political polarization, undermining his vision of a united Zambia. Broader implications. Zambia's political future hinges on whether it can move beyond the personal animosities that defined the Lungu-Hichilema rivalry. The funeral dispute is a symptom of deeper issues, a lack of trust between political factions, regional divisions, and the challenge of balancing state authority with cultural norms. Resolving these tensions will require dialogue and compromise, qualities that have been in short supply during the Lungu saga. As Zambia navigates this crossroads, the world watches, wondering whether it will emerge as a model of democratic resilience or a cautionary tale of division. Global reactions. Africa, UK, and US response. Hook. A president's death reverberates far beyond his nation's borders, drawing the eyes of the world to a small African country caught in a storm of grief and politics. From African leaders to Western powers, the reactions to Edgar Lungu's death and the ensuing funeral dispute reveal a complex web of alliances, interests, and agendas. What did the world say, and what did it mean? African responses. Lungu's death elicited condolences from across Africa, reflecting his stature as a regional leader. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, whose country hosted Lungu's final days, described him as a brother and friend, noting the privilege of caring for him during his treatment. Ramaphosa's government faced a delicate balancing act, supporting Zambia's repatriation efforts while respecting the family's wishes, as evidenced by Foreign Minister Ronald Lamola's visit to Lusaka on June 22nd. The Pretoria court's rulings underscored South Africa's commitment to regional diplomacy, but the family's appeal and the use of private security hinted at tensions beneath the surface. Kenya's President William Ruto praised Lungu as a progressive and outstanding leader who served Zambia with zeal and commitment. His condolence message was swift, contrasting with Hichilema's delayed response and highlighting Kenya's interest in maintaining strong ties with Zambia, a key player in the Southern African Development Community (SADC). Mozambique declared 3 days of mourning, reflecting Lungu's regional influence through his engagement with SADC during his presidency. Other African leaders, while less vocal, expressed solidarity through diplomatic channels. The dispute over Lungu's body, however, raised concerns about precedent. If South Africa allowed a foreign president to be buried on its soil, it could complicate future interstate relations, a point Ramaphosa likely considered when supporting Zambia's legal efforts. The saga also highlighted the cultural importance of burial disputes in Africa, as seen in past controversies over leaders like Angola's José Eduardo dos Santos and Zimbabwe's Robert Mugabe. Global implications. The global reactions to Lungu's death and the funeral dispute reveal the interconnectedness of African politics. South Africa's role as a regional power, balancing diplomacy with legal authority, underscores its influence in Southern Africa. The restrained responses from the UK and US reflect the complexities of engaging with post-colonial states, where cultural and political sensitivities require careful navigation. The dispute also highlights the broader challenge of managing the legacies of African leaders, whose deaths often spark controversies that test national and regional unity. For Zambia, the global spotlight on the funeral saga amplifies the stakes. The world's perception of Hichilema's handling of the crisis could affect Zambia's diplomatic and economic relations, particularly with Western donors and African neighbors. If the dispute is resolved in a way that respects both state protocol protocol and family wishes, it could bolster Zambia's image as a maturing democracy. If not, it risks projecting instability, with repercussions for investment and regional influence. Conclusion: the dark truth unveiled. Hook: the battle over Edgar Lungu's body is more than a family feud. It's a mirror reflecting Zambia's fractured soul. Behind Hichilema's call for unity lies a web of secrets, power struggles, and unanswered questions that threaten to shape the nation's future. What is the dark truth behind this saga, and what does it mean for Zambia and beyond? The dark truth. The dark truth of the Lungu funeral saga is that it is not just about a body, a burial, or a family's grief. It is about power, who wields it, who controls the narrative, and who defines a nation's legacy. Hichilema's emergency address, with its omissions and carefully crafted rhetoric, concealed the depth of his rivalry with Lungu, a feud that outlasted death itself. The government's insistence on repatriation, backed by legal action in Pretoria, was less about honoring Lungu than about asserting state authority and neutralizing the PF's influence ahead of 2026. The Pretoria connection, with its private security and court rulings, hints at unseen forces, perhaps diplomatic pressures, perhaps internal agendas that shaped the dispute. Esther Lungu's silence, while a personal response to grief, also reflects the family's precarious position, caught between cultural expectations and political persecution. The mystery of the body viewing, guarded by security and mired in suspicion, underscores a lack of trust that permeates Zambia's political landscape. Zambia's path forward. The saga's resolution will shape Zambia's political future. A state funeral that includes the family could heal some wounds, but the government's heavy-handed approach risks deepening divisions. The PF's fragmentation and the absence of a unifying leader threaten to tilt Zambia towards single-party dominance, a prospect that could weaken democratic checks and balances. The global reactions, while restrained, signal that Zambia's stability matters to the region and the world, particularly in the context of economic and geopolitical competition. Final thoughts. Edgar Lungu's death should have been a moment of closure, a chance for Zambia to honor a leader and move forward. Instead, it became a battleground, exposing the fragility of a nation divided by politics, culture, and history. The dark truth is that Zambia's wounds run deep, and Hichilema's address, by what it didn't say, revealed a leader grappling with the weight of power in a polarized land. As the nation awaits the final chapter of this saga, one question remains: can Zambia bury its past to build a unified future, or will the ghost of Lungu's legacy continue to haunt its soul?